Coming up on this episode, the Warriors get an impressive victory over the Minnesota Timberwolves at Target Center on Sunday. And can they pull off a miracle trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo with just over 10 days remaining until the February 5 deadline? Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast after the Warriors get a 111-85 and win over the Timberwolves at Target Center on Sunday. I think Steve put it best in the post-game there, calling it truly a bizarre game. And obviously it would have been completely different, and that feeling would have only been enhanced by being inside the stadium. But even watching on from over here in Australia, that was an odd and bizarre game, and obviously the circumstances around it we all know about, and it just felt like I don't think I've seen a good team not want to play basketball as much as what we saw from the Timberwolves today. And again, I don't blame them whatsoever, but not trying to take too much away from the Warriors, because the Warriors defense was excellent, 26 turnovers. In many ways, this game kind of provided a blueprint of what the Warriors are going to need to do moving forward. And I'll get into that in a second, but man, Minnesota, the combination of obviously what's happening there right now, and also the fact they had lost 4 straight games going into this. So they're already in some pretty poor form. From the very outset, I was like, man, these guys don't want to be here. They do not want to play basketball. And again, I don't blame them, but again, just lazy, sluggish turnovers. It was nice to see the Warriors being on the other side of a turnover disaster. Usually it's Golden State who are just completely careless with the ball, who are throwing it around everywhere, giving the other team fast break opportunities and whatnot. So it was nice for the Warriors to be on the right side of turnover woes, I suppose. But even like some of the, like there's Pod's got a layup in the first quarter that you didn't even see on the broadcast because they were showing like a replay. And that kind of epitomized to me. I was like, they don't really want to get back in transition defense. Way too many like fast break layups and whatnot. I don't know. Again, nothing against the Timberwolves because I can completely understand it, but they just didn't want to. Like, I don't think the Warriors played well defensively, yes, but I don't think Golden State even played that well. And they won by 26 without Jimmy Butler, of course, on the road. Like, Steph shot 7 of 18. He had a team high 26 points, but it wasn't as if Steph dominated the game. Melton was okay off the bench, but shot poorly. Draymond just felt like Draymond didn't have to do anything, or didn't even do anything. Like, a few of the Warrior bench players played well, but like, man, it felt like the Warriors eased into a 26-point win without playing well. And again, that's just, I think Minnesota frankly didn't want to play this game. Like, their hearts and their minds weren't in it, which again is understandable. And they couldn't get any, like, that can happen at any point for any team during a season, let alone when you're going through these circumstances. And I think these are the dark, dog days of the NBA season, kind of middle, late January, halfway through the season. And sometimes as the home team, if you're going through something like that, that's when the crowd can be a real factor. And the crowd, when you're having a sluggish night, you're not quite there, that's when the crowd can get you up and going and try and build some momentum for you. And of course, understandably, the Minnesota crowd just wasn't necessarily giving any energy for that to be able to happen. So I was a little bit nervous when the Timberwolves, the one period they did have was right at the end of the first half, where they went on a 10-0 run to finish that second quarter, got within 1. And I thought, well, the Warriors have forced 16 turnovers. Minnesota have played pretty terribly, and yet the Warriors are up 1. And I was kind of looking at it thinking, this is going to be the problem, is they can play great defense, they can scrap and play hard, but they just don't have the offensive talent and offensive generation to be able to capitalize on a situation like that where the Timberwolves are throwing the ball all over the floor. So I was nervous because I was like, well, the Timberwolves are surely going to play better. And they didn't. And the Warriors did lift their game a little bit as well in the third quarter. That third quarter was one of the more surprisingly pleasant periods of the season where, again, Minnesota seemed to go into halftime with the momentum. And then the Warriors just come out and blitz them 38-17 in the third quarter and essentially end the game. That's the game right there. So impressive win for the Warriors. Hard to really evaluate how impressive it is, I suppose, because again, I just don't think Minnesota look like a team who were just out there because they had to be out there out of obligation to the league, essentially, rather than actually wanting to play basketball. So I don't know how much we can really take from this game. The one thing that I think is notable that I wanted to discuss here. So first of all, again, the blueprint is there. The Warriors have to be an elite defensive team. They have to play hard. They have to scrap. And I thought they did that well. Like there was a play, Melton got a layup, and then Pods got a deflection on the inbounds, dove on the floor, called a timeout. That was kind of, again, signified the Warriors and them wanting to be in the game and being energetic, which Minnesota just had nothing of, again, understandably so. So that's what they're going to have to do. Every possession, they're going to have to try and maximize. They're going to have to play as hard as they possibly can because, again, like without Jimmy, they're just not going to be a high-level offensive team, right? They're going to be very reliant on Steph, like we saw against Dallas on Thursday night in that loss, 38 points, and you still lose by 8. Not only you've got no Jimmy, but you've got no Kuminga as well, who was giving them something, obviously, with his 20 points in 21 minutes against the Raptors, and then 10 points in less than 10 minutes on Thursday before that drive to the rim where he kind of hyperextended his knee and rolled his ankle at the same time. Almost impressive to do that. But I feel bad for him because he was, re-emerging, and in credit to him, he had been playing well in his brief stints before that injury. So fingers crossed. I don't know. I'm not sure we're going to see Jonathan Kuminga play again for the Warriors, although I've been saying that for weeks. And then obviously the Butler injury kind of changed things a little bit. So we'll wait and see what happens there. Bone bruising is the announcement there today on Jonathan Kuminga's left knee. Even if he's available before the deadline, like, is this enough of a warning sign for he and probably the Warriors to say, you know what, let's not risk it further. Let's sit you out until at least the deadline, and then most likely there's going to be a trade in place. And if there's not, then you can come back and play after the deadline. I don't know. That would potentially be the outcome here, even if Kuminga can technically, and like from an availability health standpoint, could be able to play in the next few days. I don't know. We'll wait and see. Just feels like he might not play for the Warriors again because the deal is most likely going to get struck here before February 5, and why risk it? So without him, without Jimmy, the Warrior offense is going to struggle. They're going to need to get fast break opportunities. They're going to have to play offense before the defense gets set. And fortunately, they had a game today where even though they didn't shoot the ball very well, they got enough easy opportunities because, again, Minnesota didn't really want to be there and had no real defensive effort for what is generally and usually a pretty good defensive team. So that's going to be the blueprint for the Warriors moving forward. Okay, scrap and fight for everything, be an elite defensive team, and then hope that Steph can propel you enough offensively and you get a little bit of help here and there to be able to remain in games and win games ultimately. And hopefully this can still be a playoff team. I don't think they're going to tank. I don't think they're going to just throw the season away, and we'll see what happens before the deadline here. The one thing I would say in terms of taking from this game, Al Horford got his second start of the season, and he played okay. He wasn't great. Oh, he was good. 10 points, 5 rebounds, couple of assists, steal a block, +7 in his minutes. I think he was 4 of 7 shooting, 2 of 5. Took advantage of Anthony Edwards on mismatches a couple of times where it was funny. Ant was probably yelling to his teammates, "No, I've got this." And like, he's obviously a strong guy, so thought he could handle Al in the post, and the old man just took him to town a couple of times. I think this is probably a move the Warriors might have to persist with. They've clearly decided that Quentin Post just isn't a starting caliber center for a team that wants to make the playoffs, right? His minutes have been limited anyway, and then he goes out on Thursday against the Mavericks, not part of the starting lineup there after 22 straight starts. And then Al Horford comes in for this game, which I suppose you have to do. You can't go small with Draymond at the 5 when you've got a front court of Randle and Gobert. So Horford comes in, and I think based on form right now, he's just a much better center option than Quentin Post. And I think the Warriors would look at it and say, we just need our best guys on the floor to start the game. And Melton is one of your best guys, but at least there's like viable alternatives with Moody and Pajemski. Like the difference, I think, between Melton and like Melton, I think is a better player than Moody and Pods, but like Moody and Pods are viable options to me, as I feel like the Warriors have decided Quinton Post isn't a viable option. And therefore, the gap between him and Horford right now is pretty significant. And this is a team that ranks 20th in net rating in first quarters so far this season. They've been able to overcome that to some degree. I just think without Jimmy, like you can't afford to go down 20-5 in 6 minutes and then fight your way back into the game. Like, they won that game against the Knicks a couple of weeks ago now, whatever it was, where they were down like 32-14. And then all of a sudden, Jimmy and Al and DeAnthony Melton and the second unit, the non-Steph Curry minutes, dominate and get them back into the game essentially by the end of the first quarter. Well, with no Jimmy, you can't afford to do that. So I think it's just important for them to just start their best players, right? Maybe Melton gets an opportunity, past All-Star break or something once the minutes restriction is lifted a little bit. But at least with him, like Moody and Pods are viable alternatives. I think Horford might bring that stabilizing presence that you've kind of lost a little bit without Jimmy to that starting group. And I also think Melton is probably more important to the non-Curry minutes because he's essentially like your backup point guard. Like a lot of the offensive generation now without Jimmy in those kind of non-Steph minutes, like the ball's going through Melton. He's trying to get to the rim. He's the one guy that can make plays off the bounce. Sometimes it can look a bit out of control. Like sometimes he'll go to the rim and it's like, you have a bad miss. Other times, like he's got real bounce. Like that Hezzy and then blow by on Gobert in the first half. I was like, whoa, that was extraordinary. And it's something that I think is fairly underrated when it comes to DeAnthony Melton, his ability to get to the paint and usually finish reasonably effectively, I think we've seen over recent weeks. So I think that's probably more important when Steph's off the floor than like having Horford on the floor when Steph's out. Now, yes, he brings a veteran presence, but I think Jimmy was so important to his effectiveness that now without Jimmy, it might be better to play Horford more minutes alongside Steph, right? And again, just making sure you start the game on the right note, okay? And not being in a situation where you're down double digits early and then Steph has to go off the floor and then it's like, well, we're down 12 and now we've got a bench unit out there that no longer involves Jimmy Butler. So how are we going to possibly get back into this game? So I think the Warriors would have hoped that this wasn't a situation or an outcome they would have arrived at where Al Horford would have to be a starter for this team. But I think there's a pretty strong argument for it now. Obviously, he's not going to play back-to-backs. The minutes restriction is still going to be there at like 22, 23, I'd assume. Maybe second half of the season, we can push that up to like 25. Because I know one of the reasons they didn't want to start him was because, well, if he's on a minutes restriction of 20 to 22 minutes and you're starting him, then and you want to close with him, then all of a sudden you're left with a huge period of time in the middle where he essentially can't play. So it's going to be fascinating to see what the Warriors do going forward here because I just can't have Draymond playing as a small ball five. Maybe they go back to that. I really hope they don't. Again, it's not ideal that Horford's a starter, but I think that's probably their best option. And then I hope Post still plays, to be honest. Like I still hope he gets reasonable minutes off the bench. It's just, are you going to go back to him? Like he was in that role for 22 games. You got a really good look at it. And now it's like, well, he's been out of the mix for we haven't started him for 2 games. Are we going to go back to him? I feel like if you have a look at a guy for 22 straight games, you get your answer pretty clearly. Okay. And if you like it, you continue with it. And if you don't, I would just I'd feel surprised. Now Horford won't be able to play tomorrow, so maybe Post is back in the starting role tomorrow against the Timberwolves. In fact, I probably hope that's the case with Horford being unavailable, and I assume they're not going to go small with Draymond at the 5 when you've got Randall and Gobert in the front court. So Post will probably start tomorrow, but I just think moving forward, it might be Horford in that spot. can they upgrade at that position before the deadline? That's probably going to be a big question mark. They don't seem to have too much interest in Anthony Davis. Obviously, Stevie and I have spoken about it frequently in terms of some of these front court options just don't fit with Draymond. And therefore, if you're going to keep Draymond, some of like a Nick Claxton, for example, to me, doesn't really fit with Draymond in the front court. And therefore, if you're going to keep Draymond, is it really worth trading for Nick Claxton when he's going to cost you a first round pick or whatever else? So if you're a nod, like Daniel Gafford is very much the same. I'm not even sure he's a starting quality center in this league, to be fair, with some of the injury stuff and what we've seen from him recently. The big one at the moment in terms of can the Warriors, because everything I'm talking about here is essentially, I don't want to say pointless, but it kind of is. Okay, we can talk about Al Horford in the starting lineup, and we can talk about how the Warriors need to play and this being a blueprint for how they can play moving forward, blah, 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 all this stuff. It doesn't matter. Honestly, if Jimmy Butler, well, not if, Jimmy Butler's out for the season, okay, this team now, as constructed, ain't doing nothing, okay? At best, they're probably a first-round playoff exit. They can maybe make the playoffs and I don't know, maybe put up a tough first-round series. Who knows? They're not going any further than that. So everything feels pretty meaningless and pretty pointless unless Mike Dunleavy Jr. in the front office can construct some kind of miracle trade that can salvage the season over the next 10 days. And obviously at the top of that is Giannis Antetokounmpo, who, by all reports, the Warriors aren't looking to trade Jimmy Butler. They're not going to trade Jimmy Butler. And we can have a big argument about that. But again, it's pointless if we think the Warriors aren't going to do it anyway. Giannis is the one guy they probably will. Okay, Giannis is the one guy where they'll go to Jimmy and say, "Hey, we've got Giannis we've got Giannis available here, right? We're just gonna have to move you. Sorry, I know Mike and Jimmy have a great close relationship, but you would make that move, and I think the Warriors would for Giannis. And man, I watched the end of that game against Denver on Friday, where Denver were just completely depleted, missing all their starters, essentially second night of the back-to-back. Their best players, Tim Hardaway Jr., essentially. And Milwaukee still lose. And Giannis strains his calf in the last minute, essentially, of that game. And even before disregard the injury for a second, I was just like watching this game, I'm like, Giannis don't want to be there. Like it was almost like today with like all the Minnesota players, like just didn't want to be there. At least they had a reasonable, valid excuse. What was Giannis' excuse on Friday against Denver? None, aside from my team sucks and I don't want to be here anymore. That was essentially, I was like, watching this, like, this dude does not want to be here whatsoever. So Mark Stein just reported again in like the last hour that essentially a lot of these deals before the deadline are being held up because teams believe that there is still a chance that Giannis gets traded before the deadline and they don't want to go into another move and potentially ruin their chances at Giannis. And we know the Warriors are going to be part of that. And that's why I'm thinking like the Warriors aren't going to make a move here until right at the deadline. Okay, or until such time as the Giannis Antetokounmpo trade happens, whether it's to them or to another team, right? Because even if the Pelicans say, yeah, we'll give you Trey Murphy for 3 first-round picks, the Warriors will be like, all right, just hold off on that until an hour before the deadline because we're just waiting around to see if Giannis is available. And this has been happening for years and years and years with Golden State. But now, right at this second, feels like the most realistic time where this dream the Warriors have could actually come into reality, right? The future of Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Milwaukee Bucks, is certainly up in the air. It's certainly uncertain. And I think the Warriors would be looking at this situation, and I'm sure they've already contacted Milwaukee, right? Being like, all right, we're in a crap situation. You're in a crap situation. Let's help each other. Okay? Because honestly, the Warriors have one of the better packages for a mid-season trade right now that Milwaukee can get back. Like the Warriors can say, here's all our picks, right? And those picks post Steph Curry are already valuable. And I think they might be increasing in value to a team like Milwaukee who look at Giannis and his growing injury concerns, he's had multiple soft tissue injuries already this season. And they're probably looking at it thinking, do we think this guy's going to be absolutely elite in his late 30s? When the 2032 pick comes around and Giannis Antetokounmpo, let's even say he's still at the Warriors at that point. There's a chance he leaves in France or gets traded elsewhere in the meantime. But even if he's still at the Warriors, he's going to be 37, 38 years old. And we think he's still going to be an elite player leading a definite playoff team by that point. He's 31 and can't lead a playoff team right now. So I actually think there's almost a win-win trade where the Warriors pay big, like pay all their picks, obviously. There's some really interesting, confusing aspects of a potential Giannis trade for the Warriors, because I think it would include, I think Jimmy would go out, whether to Milwaukee or a third team or something who might get some draft capital for taking on his contract, whatever. I think Kuminga, the Bucks have been linked to Kuminga, so I think he goes out, and I think the Warriors probably take back Kyle Kuzma and say, well, that's as part of the tax of having to get Giannis, right? Taking back Kyle Kuzma. And then there's also the Draymond aspect of it, where, again, as I kind of mentioned before, Giannis and Draymond on the same team just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? Because suddenly you got to take the ball out of Draymond's hands, really. Like the ball is in Steph and Giannis's hands. Like there was a real issue a few weeks ago, a month ago, where it felt like Jimmy just wasn't getting enough touches. And it's like, well, yeah, because Draymond's got the ball all the time. And like, that's not really working. And then all of a sudden, the last couple of weeks, it felt like Jimmy was, before the injury, it felt like Jimmy was getting involved a little bit more and having the ball in his hands a little bit more. And particularly, obviously, in the non-Steph, non-Dre minutes, where that second unit with him, Melton Horford, Pods, Will Richard Gee, whoever else you want to put in as that kind of fifth spot, was really starting to dominate. One of the biggest travesties, I think, of this Jimmy Butler injury, one of many, obviously, but that second unit kind of has still looked okay, it must be said, in the past couple of games, but it's obviously just no longer a major strength without Jimmy. But does Draymond have to go out in another deal if you trade for Giannis? And that at that point, it feels like everything would have to happen like mid-season. Like that doesn't feel like something that could all happen in the next 10 days, where it's like we trade for Giannis, we trade Kuminga and Butler, we get like, and all the picks, and maybe we have to throw Pods in, maybe, and then, you know, we get Giannis and Kuzma back, and we get Thanasis Antetokounmpo. Oh, and then we've got to trade Draymond. What can we get for Draymond? Oh, we don't have any other picks to attach to Draymond, so essentially, and he's got a player option for next season, so who's going to take him on? Can we get something of value? I don't know. If that feels way too difficult. Okay, maybe it's an aspect of you just have to, if you were able to pull off a Giannis trade, you just be like, well, we're keeping Draymond. Let's hope it works for the rest of the season, and then come the off season, we'll reevaluate. We'll either one, look to trade Draymond, particularly if he opts into his player option, or two, we'll try and maybe orchestrate something with Draymond where it's like, all right, opt out of your player option, try and take significantly less, and then you kind of feel a bit better about having Draymond on your roster on top of Giannis because he's not actually making as much money. I don't know. These are all hypothetical discussions that I'm talking about, but the Warriors would have to, they'd have to be looking at a Giannis trade right now and thinking to themselves, we need to make this happen now, because if you trade for Giannis in the offseason, which again is a possibility. In fact, I think it's still more likely that Giannis gets traded in the offseason than he does now. But if you wait till the offseason, well, you've just wasted this season, essentially. And then who knows where Steph's at, as like Steph will be 39 years old when the playoffs come around next year. Where is he going to still be an elite player? Maybe he is. Like, he's just still unbelievably that good at this point, nearly 38 years old, that maybe he's still elite at 39. But you shouldn't be banking on that. You shouldn't be banking on him still being a top handful player in the game. You should be trying to make it happen now, where it's like, Steph's still elite. This is the whole argument of using Jimmy's contract or trying to do something before this deadline to maximize the rest of this season, rather than just laying down and saying, well, Jimmy's out for the season, so that's it, done. That's our campaign is essentially over. Maybe we make the first round of the playoffs and that's it. Okay. You can't really be content with that when you've got Steph Curry at nearly 38 years old, still playing at this level of basketball. So the Warriors should be pushing for a Giannis trade. And they should probably have other things lined up to say, well, if this happens, this is what else we can do. I don't know. Maybe Draymond's part of the trade. There's still a world in which you trade Draymond and Kuminga and Buddy Hield and Pods maybe and all the picks. And again, you get Giannis and his brother, essentially. Or maybe like another minimum salary from the Bucks. I don't know. And you actually keep Jimmy. Like, could this team be a contender? I'm trying to think of it. Could this team be a contender if you had Steph, Giannis, and Jimmy, and Jimmy's obviously out for a second. Could Steph and Jimmy combo still do something for the Warriors before season's end? Maybe. Did I say Steph, Jimmy? Steph, Giannis. The Steph, Giannis combination do something for the Warriors with Jimmy Butler on the sidelines. You'd have Steph, Moody. Let's say Steph, Melton, Moody, Giannis, Horford. That'd be like your best five, I guess. And then I'm trying to think who you'd like. Quentin Post coming off the bench. Maybe you try and keep Pod, so he's coming off the bench. Will Richard, Guy Santos. I don't know. It's interesting. And then you bring Jimmy back middle of next season. Like, I suppose that's still a possibility. I doubt it. I feel like if there's a Giannis trade, the Warriors would be trying to begrudgingly move Jimmy in that scenario, I suppose. But now it feels closer than ever. And I'm not saying it's close. It's still highly unlikely and probable that I think it's unlikely that Giannis gets traded at all, full stop, before the deadline, let alone to the Warriors. But it's the only path to me where the Warriors can actually contend this season, because otherwise, like even a guy like Trey Murphy III, the Warriors might be willing to give up multiple first round picks for, even a guy like him. Let's say you're just trading Kuminga and Buddy Hield and all the picks for Trey Murphy. It feels to me like Trey's not quite at that level where you could still be a legitimate title threat with Jimmy on the sideline. I don't think he's quite at that level. It would be a case of, all right, let's integrate Trey Murphy into the team. Maybe we push our ceiling up to winning a playoff series. Okay. And then we come back next season. Trey's had a few months on the team, and then we get Jimmy back at some point middle of next season. That feels like the scenario, the best case scenario if you were to trade for a guy like Trey Murphy III, who's very, very good. But Giannis is like the only guy where it's like, oh, if we trade for Giannis, we still might have a chance of winning the chip this season. As remote as it would be. And as problematic as it is that Giannis has obviously got this calf strain, he's out for 4 to 6 weeks, right? So, which to the Warriors, and Mark Steins has reported, teams don't really care about the fact Giannis has got this injury. I'm sure the Warriors would be like, well, if we can flip Jimmy into Giannis, Jimmy's out for 12 months. We don't care if Giannis is going to be on the sidelines for another month. Right? We'll ride that one out and then bring you back into the fold. So that feels like the miracle move for the Warriors right now. And again, very, very unlikely, but the chances are growing kind of by the day at the moment with how bad Milwaukee look. And maybe they're starting to become slightly open to the idea of moving Giannis. And this idea that the Warriors don't have the assets for Giannis, I think is bullshit, really. Like, I think they can actually put together one of the better packages because their picks are so valuable in the post-Steph, and I think could remain valuable. I think Milwaukee or another team, whatever else, could still see them as valuable, even if the Warriors got Giannis, because it's like soft tissue injuries here. Is he going to be an absolutely elite player by his mid to late 30s? So it's a question we're now starting to have as a result of these injuries he's had this season. We're going to finish it up there, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. Let me know, do you think the Warriors can pull off a miraculous blockbuster Giannis trade before the deadline in the next 10 days? Don't know. I'd be shocked, but yet again, about this time last year, Luka Doncic got traded to the Lakers. So anything can happen. We'll wait and see. Any other targets you want the Warriors to look at? What do you make of the center rotation right now and the starting lineup? Do you think Al Horford should remain when he's playing and available? I think that might be the case unless the Warriors can get a deal done to upgrade at that position before the deadline. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at Pop252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter, Golden State with Mates on Instagram and TikTok, and also the Patreon as well. Just about to give away that Steph Curry Shot Ready book in a few days' time here. Thanks again, guys. See you on the next day.